You are listening to the Atlanta Sports Podcast, the only podcast covering all of your teams. Bringing you the best sports news from the state of Georgia, from the professional ranks to the high school levels, we have it all. Welcome back to the Atlanta Sports Podcasts. My name is Frankie Maloof, and I am alongside Luke Winstel. It's that time of year again, Georgia Tech, the clean, old-fashioned hate. Today we're going to give you a preview of what to expect tomorrow between the hedges in Athens, Georgia, for both of these teams.
Alright, so to start us off, we'll talk a little bit about ESPN's FPI. They're giving UGA a 62.5% chance to win, Georgia Tech getting a 37.5% chance. So it tells you who's favored there. UGA is favored by 4 points. And so far against the spread, Georgia's 4-7. So that doesn't tell you very much there, but Georgia Tech is 6-4-1.
So, I don't really put a lot of stock into the ESPN FPI rankings. It's just a bunch of mathematical calculations. It's fun to look at, though, and right now they have Georgia favored. Now, what you do want to pay attention to is the spread. That's a little bit more accurate. Georgia is a 4-point favorite, but 4 points, that's, it could be one play. Ask Georgia fans now after the Tennessee game, or the Auburn game from a few years ago. That's one play that if Tech has the ball, they can just heave up a Hail Mary, and that could be the game. So honestly, this is within a margin of error, I guess you could say. So I think this game will be close, and I'm sure it will be exciting.
Yeah, Georgia Tech being a rivalry game, it's always a good one, as many of the rivalry week games are, but I think Georgia being favored by 4 is a good sign. Just some common opponents that we'll get to later kind of maybe made me think otherwise, but let's actually go ahead and get to that. Georgia Tech and Georgia have both played Vanderbilt and UNC so far this year. Georgia Tech beat Vandy 38-7, and Georgia lost to Vanderbilt 17-16. That's the one that gets me. I'm not sure how much stock to put into that, just because Georgia didn't really have a great game when they lost to Vanderbilt, but we'll see. And then Georgia Tech lost to UNC 48-20, and Georgia beat them in the opener 33-24. So it's an interesting thing there with the common opponents. I don't tend to put a lot of stock into it, but the Vanderbilt game, again, like I said, just kind of throws me a little bit there.
Yeah, right, because Georgia Tech beat Vanderbilt badly, I guess you could say, 38-7. But then Georgia turned around a few weeks later, and they lost on homecoming. It wasn't a very good day for Bulldog Nation then. That's a little bit of a head-scratcher, like you've been saying. And, the North Carolina game, Georgia beat North Carolina in the Georgia Dome at a neutral site in the season opener. And North Carolina was expected to be a very good team. And as we know right now, just as we're recording, North Carolina has lost to North Carolina State. So their season is way down the drain. They're not going to be able to go to the ACC title game now. And, I think that part of the reason Georgia Tech had such a tough time with them was because it was on the road. They were in North Carolina. So that may have been a little bit of the reason why. But still, it's kind of confusing how, the way this common opponent things worked. So, that's interesting to see how it'll shape up.
Now we'll go into some coaching records. Paul Johnson 2-6 versus UGA, and Mark Richt is 13-2 versus Georgia Tech. Kirby Smart, being a first-year coach, has never played Tech, especially as a Georgia in the Georgia head coaching role. And in the series, Georgia leads 65, 40, and 5, so they've won 65 games, lost 40. Tied 5, so it's good there. Georgia looking to extend the series lead, and Tech looking to claw back and get some more wins to gain some ground on Georgia there in the all-time series. I think that this is going to be a very good game, like you said. Both teams are coming off wins. Georgia Tech beat Virginia 31-17 to improve to 7-4, 4-4 in the ACC. And Georgia beat ULL 35-21 in the blackout game. They're 7-4. They're also 4-4 in their conference, the SEC.
Now,
detail some key players for us, Frankie.
Well, before we get to that, I just have something I wanted to add. Mark Richt, his great record against Georgia Tech, part of that had to do with the way he strategically scheduled his games. Now, he played Georgia Southern several times the week before Georgia Tech, so he could get a glance at the triple option, especially once Paul Johnson got there. Now, Kirby Smart doesn't have a ton of experience against the option, so I'm wondering how he's going to be able to handle it this year, being a first-year coach. Remember Mark Richt, the first year against Paul Johnson, he did end up losing that game in Athens, when Georgia was favored. So it'll be interesting to see how he can take this defense, which is really good this year, and how he can make them prepared to stop the triple option offense, which is unlike any other offense. And like the key players you were mentioning, Justin Thomas, he's a senior quarterback for Georgia Tech. He's trying to beat Georgia 2 times in his career, which is something not a lot of Georgia Tech quarterbacks can say they've done. On the season, he's 67 for 124 with 1,290 passing yards, 8 touchdowns and 1 interception. He's really done a much better job taking care of the ball this year than he did last year. That was one of the big things he worked on in the offseason. Last year, he had a down year in production. And he's really done a good job to rebound for a senior season.
Yeah, on the other side of quarterback for Georgia, Jacob Eason has more completions than Justin Thomas has passing attempts. Eason is 178 for 322, has for a little over 2,100 yards, and his touchdown to interception ratio would be 13-6. Pretty solid, especially being a freshman, being kind of thrown in there. As far as running backs go, Georgia wins that battle as well. With Nick Chubb, he's got 185 carries for 900 yards. It's been a down year for him. The vibe just hasn't been the same around Nick Chubb, but he'll most likely end up as a 1,000-yard rusher, so it's still really impressive what he's able to do for Georgia coming off that knee injury.
Yeah, and Georgia also has Sony Michel in there. He's had a pretty good year as well, so that takes away some of the carries that Nick Chubb would have gotten. And part of the reason the people had such big expectations for him, besides the fact that his reputation from the years past, is he did start off really well against North Carolina. He had 222 rushing yards that day, and he's kind of cooled down a little bit since, but he has been the leading rusher, so maybe he'll be back for that. And J.J. Green on the other side, he was a transfer from Georgia. He transferred to Georgia Tech, I think it was 2 years ago, sat out last year and is finally able to play this year. While he's not, he doesn't have the most carries on the team, or he's not the leading rusher for Georgia Tech. It's just going to be interesting to watch him as he gets back to Sanford Stadium for the first time since he was a Georgia Bulldog. So he'll be definitely motivated to play a little extra. And also the Georgia Tech rushing, they have Dietrich Mills, 114 carries for 578 yards. He is the leading rusher. And Marcus Marshall also has 569 yards on 87 carries. Georgia Tech likes to spread the ball around a lot more than most other teams do, due to that triple option, which has been working pretty well this year.
Yeah, another tidbit about J.J. Green, the transfer that you mentioned from Georgia to Georgia Tech, had a kickoff return touchdown versus Pitt earlier in the season. He's a very explosive player. I remember watching him in a few Georgia games when he played for them. He looks like he had a bright future, and now I think he's going to try to make his former team pay. Yeah,
I agree. So just some other stats before we move on. Georgia Tech scores 27.8 points per game. Georgia scores 23.7 points per game. So Georgia Tech has a better offense, which most people would agree with at this point. Also, Georgia lets up 23.7 points per game, the same amount of points as they score, and Georgia Tech allows 24.8 points per game. So they win that margin themselves, 27-24. So, I'm guessing this game will be low scoring. How about you?
Yeah, I can't see this one being a shootout where it's like 45 to 42 or something like that. I see it more being like a 27-24 or 24-21 type of game. It'll come down to the end. I think it'll be definitely under 5 points, or kind of with the spread, either a 3 or a 4 point game. Maybe even less. The stats don't tell me a whole lot just because of the difference in competition. Georgia's played teams like Tennessee, Ole Miss, just to name a few. And Tech's had an ACC schedule that I think is easier than Georgia's. So I don't put a whole lot of weight into how much they're scoring, or really how much they're allowing for that matter. Just, I look at the overall talent on the team. I think Georgia has more talent, but I think Tech will come out and play better than Georgia, so that's why I think it will be close.
Well, you're talking about the schedule. The SEC East isn't exactly the toughest division to play in the entire country.
Yeah, that's true.
You got teams like Vanderbilt, who did end up beating Georgia. You've also got Missouri, who hasn't really been good this year. Kentucky hasn't been good. South Carolina. I mean, the only real contenders at one point Tennessee was, and then Florida now. But the SEC East and the ACC Coastal may be the two worst divisions in the NCAA.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm still an SEC biased person, I'll admit that, but I still think the East is better. The SEC East is better than the ACC Coastal. But I see what you're saying there. I definitely think that's true. They're probably two of the worst parts in the Power 5. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and this game might have a lot to say about that. This might be bragging rights, not only between Georgia and Georgia Tech. It could also be bragging rights between the two conferences, too, as well. All right, so keys to the game. Georgia Tech will win if they can stop the run, forcing a freshman quarterback in Jacob Eason to lead his team yet again down the field in the last quarter of the game.
Yeah, Jacob's done a pretty good job of that so far for Georgia, but I think if they can make it hard on him and force him to where the Georgia Tech defense knows there's a passing play coming or they know what Eason has to do, I think it's going to be tough on him with being a freshman. And that's something they need to do. I agree with that. And for Georgia, I think that they'll win if they don't beat themselves with penalties. They have to stay disciplined against the triple option, not turn over the ball. And the second thing is they have to get the ball to their playmakers. They have to isolate Isaiah McKenzie and Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. Really those three, just get them the ball constantly. If one of them's hot, just keep giving them the ball. And I think the play calling has to be really good for Georgia if they want to win.
And I think the play calling has actually gotten better this year as it's gone on. It's gotten much better, especially now that they're trying to stick with the run. If it's not working at first, we're going to try it again until finally we can't try it anymore. Earlier in the year, especially versus Missouri, they tried the run. It didn't work. They immediately went to the pass. They can't do that too much longer, especially against Georgia Tech now that only allows 166 rushing yards a game. And Georgia's two running backs should be able to get combined well over 200. They're averaging 179 per game, so that'll be a good matchup there. I do think that if Georgia can get the run going, and I think that they will take care of business here. If it's high scoring affair, I got Tech. If it's low scoring, I think Georgia will take care of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't think I could really put any of that better. I definitely think you're correct.
All right, so before we finish up, we're just going to do something a little bit fun. We're going to review some of the recent years in the Georgia Tech rivalry. Some of the best memories from each of those teams. So we're going to start off with Georgia Tech. In 1998 to 2000, that was their last multi-game winning streak versus Georgia. That also included the 1999 51-48 thriller over the Bulldogs in overtime in Atlanta. So they also had 2008. They didn't win between 2000 and 2008. It was their 45-42 win in Athens. It was the first victory since 2000. That was also Paul Johnson's first year as Georgia Tech head coach. And then in 2014, number 16 Georgia Tech beat number 9 Georgia 30-24 in overtime in Athens. That was a thriller of a game. I happened to be there. It was a good game.
Yeah, for Georgia in 2009, they had a 30-24 win over number 7 Georgia Tech in Atlanta and salvaged their season. In 2013, they won 41-34 in double overtime back in Atlanta. And in 2006, Georgia defeated number 16 Georgia Tech 15-12. So some very, very interesting, fun to watch, eventful games these past several years, and I think we can expect another classic.
Yeah, and while Georgia has dominated the series as of late, I do think that Tech has kept it close. If you look at these games, even the ones that Georgia won that we mentioned, double overtime, they won by 3 and by 6. Those are all one-score games. So Georgia Tech can keep this thing close. I think they've got a shot, especially this year. Georgia is vulnerable. And on the flip side, so is Georgia Tech. Neither team is at their best right now. But I do think that just because of the series rivalry and the fact that, you played against these guys in high school, you played against each other already, there's going to be a little bit of extra motivation to play this game. All right, and that just about does it. So thank you again for listening to the Atlanta Sports Podcasts. We would like to ask you to come to our website, atlantasportspodcast.com, and to sign up for our newsletter there. You can see it on the right side of your screen. You can also leave us a review in the iTunes store. We would appreciate that. Or you can contact us under the Contact Us tab on our website. And we hope to see you next week with another show.